And the purpose of being here is actually, this is where they've got the medals of Sir Peter Snell on hold. At the moment, they're not actually on display, but I have got some footage and things like that, so they rotate some displays through. But as we're doing the generation skip thing, it can't be. Rod, can you just say something? So I've got one.
Hello, everybody. Yes.
Just making sure it's got the video up right. There you go. So the reason for being at Te Papa is because this is where Sir Peter Snell donated his medals, and to talk about past sports people in New Zealand without talking about Sir Peter Snell and also Sir Murray Halberg and Arthur Lydiard is, I don't know, to talk about Sesame Street without Olmo. Just something where that's a huge hub of what happened in New Zealand sport, particularly post World War II. And so I'm not going to say much today because Rod knows that era really well. So Rod, my questions will be brief, but I want to go back to actually before 1960, which is still a really magic Olympic day in New Zealand history. 2 gold medals in an hour on the running track. And I just sort of say, well, that level of success, where did it come from? Because it's stunning.
Yeah, well, it certainly was, and when those the people on board here, if you ever get a chance to see any of the books that was written at that time by Arthur Lydiard and Peter Snell, and their journey, and really the 1960 Olympic Games, the New Zealanders and Australians really weren't even considered to be great runners. They weren't. 1956 in Melbourne, so New Zealanders went across to race. But really, 1960, when Peter Snell won the 800 meters, and Herb Elliott from Australia won the 1500 meters, and Murray Halberg from New Zealand won the 5,000 meters, and Barry McGee, also from New Zealand, got a bronze marathon. And the world suddenly said, what's going on down there? What's going on? How do they train so well, and how do they race so well? And then it started to come back to the great coaches, Arthur Lydiard and the team of runners that ran, and they were pretty well all from the Auckland area. There were a lot of runners around New Zealand that were trained by or coached by Lydiard, but in those days it was very much by mail. You wrote a letter and you put it in the mailbox, and that's how you commuted, and sometimes on the phone, of course. But Lydiard was a huge influence, and Arthur Lydiard, being the great coach that he was, he went out and did everything. He went out and trained how he wanted his athletes to train. So the 3 favorite words that I have in my life: learn by doing. And so if you go out and you learn how to do things, then you can pass that on to the next person. And that's what Lydiard did. He thought maybe he would run 200 miles a week to see how he felt. Well, that didn't work for him. But then he said, well, maybe just 50 miles a week, and that didn't work. But he realized that 7 days a week of training, and at least 2 times a day training, maybe with the Friday off, gave you an opportunity to run at least 100 miles. And that seemed to be the basis for the training, for the aerobic condition, that is, a build up your strength and your stamina through long, slow running. And then it was a wee bit like the pyramid or the mountain or Mount Everest. It was a wee bit like Sir Edmund Hillary. You take the first part as the bottom part, which is the biggest part, which is the conditioning. And then you move into the hill training and conditioning and strengthening. And then you do what we do, conditioning, speed training. And then you start to do racing. So the pyramid, as it went up, you did less. but the basis of the training was all in the pyramid, and that is often referred to as the Lydiard pyramid of training. And Lorraine Muller has talked about this in her conversations with you all, and that is that it was learned back in the 1950s and 60s. And the athletes today worldwide are still doing basically what we call the Lydiard principles of training. And so it's quite amazing that Arthur Lydiard was able to prepare and do this, not only by experimenting himself, but then training the athletes to go out and to go to Olympics and win medals. That was incredible, absolutely incredible.
So I was saying just before to you that when Sir Peter Snell went to Rome, he was only 21 years of age. And he was also almost the last person picked, and was even debated that he should go. There was an out-and-out favourite in the race, and even with 150 metres to go, he had a lot of work to do. But I mean, even getting to Rome, I think, was an arduous thing, let alone competing there. I mean, how did a 21-year-old unknown have the confidence and the courage to win that incredible race?
Yeah. Well, I remember when I talked with Peter, and he talked about the inspiration and how athletes overcame challenges before him. And when you go back to the 1950s, 1948 Olympics in London, when New Zealand sent a team to the London Olympics in 1948, and they took nearly 3 months on a boat to get there. And there were swimmers and runners. Now, how did they train? It was incredible. The runners were able to run around the deck, but the swimmers, I asked Nairi Galloway, who was 1948 Olympian,
Wow.
and she said that she did all her training in a bathtub and did training with almost elastic bands, training on the deck. So how did these athletes prepare to go? And of course, the Jack Lovelock in 1936, when he went to the Olympics, and everything that was learned from them was talked about and written about. And Peter Snell made sure that he read that and was inspired by them because he knew he had more opportunities than they did, and he was not going to waste that, and he was going to train and do the best that he could. And that I learned that from his writings and his books. I learned and read that from the Arthur Lydiard books, and I learned from history right back to the 1936 Olympics and the great Jack Lovelock, and how he went to school in Timaru in New Zealand, and how he trained and how he became a Rhodes Scholar. And all that brings together those little steps and all those little pieces of that pyramid that I was able to put together and be inspired by them. And I was inspired by Peter Snell as he was inspired by the people before him. So that's just an incredible journey.
Well, one of the favourite movies that I have is a movie called Chariots of Fire, which features Harold Abrahams racing against, who was the one who won. I've got it on the tip of my tongue. But the amazing thing about that 100 metres that Abrahams won is that there was a New Zealander, Arthur Porritt, who was in 3rd place. He doesn't feature in the movie because he didn't think the movie would be of high enough quality when he was first asked. And I think it's written that he regretted that because it went on to be a tremendous hit. But when you get the footage of Jack Lovelock winning the gold medal, it's actually Harold Abrahams who's commentating on him winning. And so you're right, that amazing chain of events that leads to a particular moment.
Yes. Yeah, I think for all of us that we learn from the people before us, and we learn from, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So we look back, and sometimes I say to people, don't look back, it's behind you for a reason.
Yeah.
But sometimes we need to look back to get the strength and the inspiration to move forward. And these athletes, and some of you are listening to those, and we're watching these athletes from just one generation ago. And I'm talking now 2 and 3 generations ago, and how they all influenced my life and my journey, and reading the great books, The Kings of Distance, and Alfred Schraub, and all the great runners back in the 1800s and 1900s. They were our pioneers. They passed us the baton like you do in a relay. They passed it on to me. I passed it on to the next. I feel that Peter Snell and Murray Hilberg passed the baton to Dick Quacks and John Walker and myself. And we've passed it on to the next generation. And that's very, very exciting.
So the personal question. So in 1960, how old were you? I wasn't born yet, so I'm
10 years old. I was 10 years old.
right.
And
So
that,
do you have a memory of it at the time?
Oh yes, absolutely. I remember, because that was also to the year that Sir Edmund Hillary came to our school.
Right.
And so
wow.
And so those two things, the Olympics of 1960, and I mean, I don't know in detail the actual performance, but of course the film and all the newspaper. My parents cut them all out and pasted them in books, and we were able to, and my brother still has all those cuttings. And of course, we would read them every day, and John would explain to me, and my father would take us through them. But even as a 10-year-old, we were very, very aware of what was going on at the time of the Olympic Games.
Wow. So Peter won that medal, made a Belgian person a little bit grumpy and reticent for a while. And then obviously a lot happens between Olympics, and he only ran for, I think, 5 more years. So tell us about Sir Peter from the time of winning that medal through to in 1965 saying, I've done enough running.
Yeah, well, the next, of course, Arthur Lydiard organized them to go to Europe and to Ireland and to England to run, and they traveled. And in 1962 was the Empire Games. It wasn't called the Commonwealth Games at that point. It was still the Empire Games. And Peter Snell went and won 2 more medals in the 800 and the mile, 880 and the mile. And then 1960, he was running in New Zealand and went to the United States to run, sometimes indoors. And then in 1964, of course, he was focused on the Olympic Games. And once again, he went and won 2 gold medals. He set world records. And I think by 1965, I think Peter had realized that there was nothing much more he could do. And he wanted to be inspired by something else. And that's why he wanted to get back into, he wanted to go into coaching. And he was very involved with Arthur Lydiard, traveling around New Zealand with the coaching program for athletics. And but I think he realized not long after that he wanted to go and understand now what it was: human performance, physiology, medicine. He wanted to understand how and why he did what he did. Was there a formula? Was there a secret? What was it? And that's why he wanted to go back to school and educate himself and learn physiology and human performance. And he did that very, very successfully, and got his doctorate and was understanding of all the training that he did. And in fact, he was asked once, what would he do? What now that he has done 30 years study and physiology and human performance and done all this testing, what would he have done differently? Knowing all that information and all that knowledge, what would he done differently than what he did doing his training with Lydiard? And he looked at you straight and he said, very little, very little. So Lydiard was obviously way before his time. He understood the concept of training. He understood, because he wouldn't pass any of those training methods or ideas onto other athletes unless he had experienced them himself. So he knew what he was doing. He had tested on himself. And that is the amazing thing. Once again, we learn by doing. And the athletes today can learn a lot more than we were, because they have more access to information. But you've still got to get out there and do it, to experience, to understand what's going on in your own mind and your own body, and understanding about training and recovery and nutrition, eating well, eating healthy.
Is it, I mean, probably two questions that go together. But first of all, is it accurate that Sir Peter Snell not only still holds the New Zealand 800-metre record, but that his time would have got him into last year's Olympics in the final?
Yes. Peter Snell. I mean, we have all through our lives, we have experienced incredible athletes in incredible sports. And of course, whether it's swimming or it's skiing or rugby or any sport, we have these incredibly talented and trained hard athletes who are doing something incredible. And I look back at Peter Snell, and he was a special person. And he pursued that, knowing that he had that ability to learn very quickly and to adapt very quickly, but he still had to do the hard training. He still had to do the training and understand what he was doing. And wonderfully, he had a very, very good coach. And
he didn't find that training easy, did he? I mean, I know that there were times where Lydia had basically left him out there to walk back, and there is some sort of, they sound apocryphal because Jack Ralston told them, but stories of where sort of Jack had come past Sir Peter Snell about 6 miles from Lydiard's house, and Snell said, tell Lydia to come and pick me up. And when poor young Jack arrived at the house, he said, Peter Snell says to pick him up, sir. And Arthur said, how did you get here? And he said, legs. And he goes, Snell can do the same. And when Snell apparently came in, he looked at Jack and said, knew I was wasting my time asking you to do that. So he didn't find the training hard, did he? I find it easy. Sorry.
No, and I don't. But I also have spoken to a lot of athletes in my time, and those that have taken step by step and worked hard and had the knockbacks and had the setbacks, because you don't learn how to move forward unless you understand the mistakes you've made. And I think, and he knew in himself that things were starting to come right, but it was not an easy pathway. It was not an easy journey. And I've yet to find or speak to any athlete that they have said to me, it has been an easy journey. It has been a piece of cake. It has been simply wonderful, and I'm the best in the world. I've never, ever heard that in my whole life. So I know you have to learn by training hard. You have to learn but not pushing yourself beyond your limits. But, you mentioned there that he had to walk home. Well, that was okay. If it was life-threatening, he would have gone, I know. But,
yes.
The number of times that I've been out with my brother, John, we went out in a training, and he came out with me on the bike, and we're talking away. In fact, it was a quad bike. And of course, the idea was that I would go out and run all these hills, and then I would jump on the back and he would drive me home. And we went out for about an hour, and I said, he said, how do you feel? And he said, I'm pretty tired. I'm ready to come home. And he stopped the bike and he said, well, you know the way home, it's back that way. And he drove off. So then I had to learn, I'm only about half a tank of fuel here, so I better make sure that I do it properly. And I did. I had to walk and run, and luckily I came across water, and I drank water. But I learned very quickly That's what he was trying to get me to understand. And I think a lot of the runners have been through that too.
I think later in the years, we talked to some artists and some authors, etc. It's the same story in a different field. And the levels of angst and disappointment and try again and all of that kind of thing. You and Sir Peter have something in common in that you both, and a lot of young New Zealanders do for different reasons. You both went to live somewhere else in the world. I know he went initially for academics and didn't come back. I mean, he found, in a sense, his place in the world from that mindset. How was that process for someone, particularly someone held in high esteem by their country?
Well, Peter knew what it was going to take for him to do the journey he wanted for himself, and that was to get his doctorate, to get his standing in human performance and physiology. And unfortunately, New Zealand didn't have any opportunities for him.
Right.
And he knew that was going to be the best. And he went to Dallas, where he studied under incredible people, experienced people, and he learned from the best in the world, and he became the best in the world at his. But in his heart, I always knew, in his heart, he was a New Zealander true and through. He loved this country. He honored his country in everything he did. If anybody introduced him, this is Peter Snell from Dallas, Texas, and he would say, no, this is Peter Snell, New Zealand Peter Snell, who lives in Dallas, Texas.
Wow.
So he always held New Zealand in a very, very high esteem and respect. And I know that he would have loved to have come back in his later years to have been involved with the incredible journey that is happening in New Zealand with high performance and at Toko University and understanding and training. And Peter was just not able to do that because his life was, his working life was coming to an end, close to retirement.
Well, it was obviously, when we see the footage and put it up, it was very emotional for him to have made the donation here to Papa.
Oh, yes.
And to have things, stored for the future generation. And clearly, when he spoke there, that was the way that he was thinking. I think often in New Zealand we do honour people well, and so to me that was emotional. Simply watching the footage and seeing him be honoured. As a final thing, I thought one of the things about Sir Peter Snell that was quite quirky was just how competitive he was. And there's a neat part in some of the stories where, of course, he couldn't earn money as an athlete. But somewhere in between him retiring and then finally moving into full-time study and that sort of stuff, someone came up with a sports series called Superstars. And you had to do all of the sports that the other people did. And chin-ups, and Precious McKenzie was amazing because, he couldn't stop. And I think Sir Peter won the series.
Yes.
And made enough money to pay for his initial study.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And he went to the World Superstars against some of the best athletes in the world, and these were professional athletes earning millions and millions of dollars at the time. Yes. And here was Peter. He was just wanting to get $35,000 towards his education, but I had one of the superstars with him here in New Zealand,
right?
And I was just amazed that every sport we would be chatting, and I would be trying to learn from rugby or from sailing or wherever it was of this particular sport and learning. But Peter was always sitting down and studying, and he would always go right through the course and study every challenge, every obstacle, and look back at it and look back this way and look forward. And he
Yes.
was very, very thorough in the way he approached everything. And when we were doing the cycling, I was with him, and he came to me and he said, he will lead out, and then I was to lead out,
Yes.
and he would sit on me, and then when he went, I was to jump in behind him.
Right.
And of course, I led out, and we made a gap already from the rest of the athletes, and he went past me like he did all the athletes in 1964, just flying. And of course, I tried to catch up with him, and he looked back to see where I was, and he hit the curb and he crashed.
Ah,
And he broke his collarbone, so he wasn't able to finish the Superstars. And
wow.
I said, what on earth were you doing? And he said, I wanted you to be right there, and I couldn't see you. And so, unfortunately, that was just, he was right to the very, very end. He trained and prepared himself to be the best that he could be. And we learned that from him. And as much as we were having a lot of fun off the field, when it came to being competitive, I learned very quickly that Peter was not here for fun. He was here to win.
Well, I met him only once, as I think you know. Our son spent a few days with him in Dallas, which he still regards as a very great privilege. But I met him at the World Masters Table Tennis Champs, and it took a few moments to get him to acknowledge that someone was there because he had lost. And but no, that was a really nice moment too. And again, a gentleman, and I think that's something that people should remember as well. That he was a gentleman. He was a remarkable person, not unlike yourself, not unlike Sir Brian Williams, who we spoke to a few weeks ago. Incredibly tough competitors, but very warm in the moment people.
Yes. And as we've discussed and realized that by now, that he was the best in the world at what he did. He was the greatest of his time. There's no doubt about that. And of course, the world were tugging at him and pushing him and wanting him to do this, but he stayed to his core values. And the core values was to be the best that he could be, to inspire others. And it wasn't a matter about traveling the world and exclusive and luxury, this, that, and the other thing. Peter was the happiest at a table tennis, helping young kids to play better, or helping us kids to train better, or to looking at our training and making a few suggestions. He gave a lot back to my generation, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think he and his wife, Mickey, also became very good across the States at, goodness, now I'm thinking again, when you've got the compass, running, orienteering. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad you got there before I did, because it was probably half an hour away. But that became one of their loves as well.
Oh yes, well he became, for in his age group, he was #1 in the world. He was rated #1 in the world, and not only was he able to, to run successfully between orientation points, or to compass points, but he was able to already know the course in his head. He knew exactly where he was going. He had because he was a surveyor in his early days, and he understood topography. He understood, the contours of the map. And sometimes I would say, "Oh, I think it's much easier to run up the ridge here and across and down." And Peter would go straight across and beat me by 10 minutes. And I go, "But you had to go through bush and track." He said, "But in the end, it was an easier track than going right up to the top and then coming down." So I tended to wait and follow Peter from that point on.
Excellent. All good. Hey, thank you so much, Rod. I appreciate it. And as I say, we'll put it together in a way that certainly honours Sir Peter, because he is something, as I said, that is someone who passes the baton on, but also someone who raised the aspiration of probably every New Zealander of his time in so many ways.
And if I may just close with that, I know how inspiring he was to John Walker. And I know how much John Walker honoured him. And John just said, if I can just be 20% of what Peter is, I will be a happy boy. Well, we know John went on to almost equal Peter in his success on the track, but certainly Peter was our champion, our leader. He was our Sir Edmund Hillary. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you so much for your time, and I will get this out in the next few days. Thanks for those who came along to hear it live, and I will head off towards Parliament and try and make some progress with some of our kids. So we'll see you soon. Thank you so much, Rod.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, people.